America didn't change only in wars and elections. It changed because someone flipped a coin, ignored a memo, panicked over a volcano stamp, or rage quit Blockbuster. In this video, we're walking through 49 snap decisions, political, tech, cultural, that could easily have gone the other way and taken the whole country with them. 1. If you think your stamp collection is the definition of boring, you clearly haven't heard about the time a single sticky square of paper literally moved a canal. The United States was fully prepared to dig the Inter-Ocean Canal through Nicaragua. It was a done deal, the blueprints were dry, and the champagne was on ice. That is, until a lobbyist named Philippe Bunau Varela decided to play dirty with Philately. He sent every U.S. senator a Nicaraguan stamp featuring the Momotombo volcano spitting smoke and lava, implying that Mother Nature was ready to melt their investment. The senators, terrified of financing a canal that would inevitably turn into a lava lamp, panicked and switched the location to Panama overnight. So we owe the entire geopolitical landscape of Central America to a piece of mail worth a few cents. 2. Back in February 1965, the bill for Medicare was essentially dead in the water, floating face down in the legislative pool. Representative Wilbur Mills, a man whose name sounds like a brand of flavorless oatmeal, was the powerful chairman blocking it. But in a moment of absolute bureaucratic wizardry, or perhaps just to silence the headache, he made a snap decision. He took the hospital insurance bill, smashed it together with a plan for doctors' fees, and created a legislative Frankenstein's monster. This hybrid package confused the opposition just enough to slide through committee like a greased pig. Today, 65 million people have health coverage not because of a grand moral awakening, but because a guy named Wilbur decided to bundle the paperwork to get to lunch faster. 3. We came dangerously close to living in a world where news anchors would have to look into the camera and say, "The president just posted a Friendstalker update." In March 2006, the founders of what is now Twitter were torn between the vowel-free Twatier and the incredibly creepy Friendstalker. Apparently, the branding meeting was happening in a cheap diner, and realizing Friendstalker sounded like a felony waiting to happen, they flipped a coin. Fate intervened, sparing us from the worst social media name in history. Retweets, doom scrolling, and the collapse of civil discourse are bad enough without doing it on an app that sounds like it requires a legally binding restraining order. 4. During the 1992 Los Angeles riots, the city was tearing itself apart, and authorities were failing miserably to stop the bleeding. Rodney King, the man at the center of the storm, was pushed in front of a microphone with a prepared legal statement that was about as inspiring as a tax audit. Realizing the script was wood and garbage, he tossed the legalese aside, looked at the cameras, and ad-libbed the famous line, "Can we all get along?" It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't Shakespeare, but it was raw enough to cut through the noise. That one improvised sentence did more to lower the temperature on the streets than thousands of riot police and batons ever could. 5. The legal framework for abortion in America wasn't carved in stone tablets. It was practically scribbled in the margins. Justice Harry Blackmun, when drafting the original Roe v. Wade opinion, had set a strict cutoff at the end of the first trimester. It was clean, it was simple. But during the final editing phase, presumably while staring at the ceiling and wondering what to have for dinner, he decided to tweak the text. He extended the window to viability, pushing it to roughly 24 weeks. That last-minute edit didn't just change the ruling, it set the stage for 5 decades of screaming matches, protests, and ruined Thanksgiving dinners across the country. 6. We all remember when the lights went out at the Superdome during Super Bowl 47, but the real drama was happening backstage in the dark. With the stadium plunged into blackness, the production team started panicking, suggesting they delay Beyoncé's halftime reprise until the grid stabilized. Beyoncé, presumably channeling the energy of 1,000 suns, looked them dead in the eye and said, "We go on schedule." And wouldn't you know it, the electrical grid was apparently terrified of disappointing her because the lights popped back on just in time. She broke Twitter speed records that night, proving that high-voltage infrastructure is no match for a diva with a deadline. 7. During a recent high-stakes election count in Nevada, officials stared at a computer screen that had decided to take a nap. A software glitch was delaying the results, and in the current climate, a delay is basically rocket fuel for conspiracy theorists. They could have paused the count and waited for tech support. Instead, they made a split decision to go full Big Brother and live stream every single ballot batch being counted. Suddenly, thousands of Americans were binge-watching democracy like it was the season finale of a Netflix thriller. It was boring, it was tedious, and it absolutely worked to calm everyone down. Who knew the cure for national anxiety was watching people shuffle paper in 4K resolution? 8. Good graphic design goes unnoticed. Bad graphic design picks the President of the United States. In Palm Beach County, the infamous butterfly ballot was designed to be easier for seniors to read, using a larger font. A nice thought, right? Wrong. The layout was so confusing that thousands of lifelong Democrats accidentally punched the hole for Pat Buchanan instead of Al Gore. A supervisor briefly considered scrapping the confusing ballots and holding a revote, but decided it was too late to fix the mess. 537 votes later, George W. Bush was heading to the White House. It remains the only time in history a font choice has effectively served as a kingmaker. 9. On a pre-dawn morning in January 2021, the compliance team at Robinhood stared at their screens in horror. The volatility charts for GameStop looked less like financial data and more like the heart monitor of a squirrel on a triple espresso. Faced with a potential liquidity crisis that would vaporize their own bank accounts, they hit the nuclear button and restricted buying. It was the ultimate betrayal for the Power to the People app. Retail traders screamed into the void. Congressional hearings popped up like mushrooms, and every couch investor learned a hard lesson. Free trading apps are great until you actually start winning against the house. 10. If you enjoy clicking the bottom left corner of your screen to find your files, you should thank Bill Gates for having a rare moment of good taste. Back in 1995, the development team wanted to axe the Start button completely because they thought it looked too cutesy for serious business users. They were ready to ship the software without it, until Gates overruled them just minutes before the master disks were pressed. The little flag survived the corporate guillotine, and generations of users learned that the only way to shut down a computer was to ironically click a button labeled Start. 11. In July 1975, the Cold War was supposed to thaw with a handshake in orbit between American and Soviet astronauts. But just before the big moment, a hatch got stuck, threatening to turn the historic photo op into an international embarrassment. Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov suggested a completely untested, improvised trick to equalize the pressure by sharing air tanks, basically jury-rigging a spaceship like a leaky faucet. NASA Mission Control gulped, sweated, and eventually gave the green light. The fix worked, and détente floated into living rooms worldwide, proving that sometimes world peace relies on a last-minute plumbing decision. 12. The entire streaming revolution began because Reed Hastings was terrible at returning library books. In March 1997, he realized he had racked up a humiliating $40 late fee for a VHS copy of Apollo 13 at Blockbuster. Instead of just paying the fine and moving on, he got angry. While jogging off his rage, he hatched a scheme for a mail-order DVD service with no late fees. He quit his day job before the sweat dried, and Blockbuster eventually went from being a Friday night staple to a museum exhibit. It serves them right. $40 was a lot of money for a movie you already saw in theaters. 13. Chief Justice John Marshall spent weeks agonizing over the draft for Marbury versus Madison, a case that seemed destined to be boring. Then, just hours before releasing the opinion, he decided to insert a daring paragraph that effectively struck down a piece of federal law. That last-second flourish birthed judicial review, which is a fancy way of saying the Supreme Court gave itself the superpower to say, "Because I said so," to Congress. Without that mic-drop footnote, the Supreme Court would just be a group of people in robes with strong opinions and no actual power to enforce them. 14. In 1968, 3M scientist Spencer Silver failed miserably at inventing a superglue, creating a weak adhesive that barely stuck to anything. It was a scientific flop that gathered dust for years until a colleague, Art Fry, had a eureka moment in church. He needed a bookmark for his hymnal that wouldn't fall out but also wouldn't tear the holy paper. He raided the failed glue stash, applied it to yellow scrap paper, and the Post-it note was born. A sticky mistake became the defining office supply of the century, proving that sometimes your biggest failure is just a billion-dollar idea waiting for the right hymn. 15. When Napoleon's envoy casually asked American diplomats in Paris if they wanted the entire Louisiana territory for $15 million, the Americans nearly fainted. James Monroe and Robert Livingston only had permission to spend $10 million on New Orleans. They had no cell phones, no way to call President Jefferson, and about 5 minutes to decide. In a caffeine-fueled panic, they shouted, "Deal!" and effectively doubled the size of the United States on a whim. It remains the greatest impulse buy in history, proving that sometimes it's better to beg Congress for forgiveness than to miss out on a clearance sale for half a continent. 16. Branch Rickey was a man who understood the power of publicity, but he nearly postponed the integration of baseball for the most mundane reason possible. The team photographer called in sick. In 1947, Rickey wanted the signing of Jackie Robinson to be perfect, visual, and iconic. But as the clock ticked, his impatience won out. He decided to hell with the perfect shot and signed Robinson anyway, letting history debut without a glossy 8x10 headshot. It's a good reminder that if you wait for everything to be picture perfect, you might just miss the chance to change the world. 17. On the frigid eve of January 28, 1986, engineers at Morton Thiokol were practically begging their managers not to launch the Challenger. They wrote a memo warning that the O-rings would fail in the cold, a warning that was as subtle as a neon sign. But managers, worried about schedules and PR, tabled the discussion and drank their coffee. The shuttle launched, and 73 seconds later, the sky broke apart. It stands as a grim lesson that corporate silence and yes men can be far more dangerous than rocket fuel, and that safety manuals are unfortunately often written in tears. 18. Bob Woodward was ready to move on. He and the editors at the Washington Post initially saw the Watergate break-in as a low-level, petty burglary unworthy of the front page. That was until he met a chain-smoking source in a parking garage at 11 p.m. Deep Throat's whispered advice to follow the money wasn't just dramatic, it was the pivot point that convinced Woodward to keep digging. If that meeting had been canceled or if the source had stayed home, Richard Nixon might have finished his term comfortably. It turns out, the fate of the presidency hinged on a guy in a trench coat having excellent cinematic timing. 19. After the horrific Charleston Church massacre in 2015, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley initially planned for a week of quiet reflection, hoping to avoid politicizing the tragedy. But the public fury was rising faster than the tide. 2 days in, realizing that reflection looked a lot like inaction, she made a swift pivot and ordered the Confederate flag yanked from the State House grounds. That decision broke a decades-long stalemate and rippled across the South, proving that sometimes a politician actually reading the room can achieve more in 48 hours than committees do in 48 years. 20. In 1853, Chef George Crumb was dealing with an annoying customer at a Saratoga Springs resort who kept sending his fried potatoes back, complaining they were too thick and soggy. In a moment of pure, petty spite, Crumb shaved the potatoes paper thin, fried them until they were rock hard, and drowned them in salt, expecting the diner to choke on them. Instead, the customer devoured them. The Saratoga chip was born out of culinary rage, eventually becoming the global potato chip industry. Your favorite snack exists only because a chef tried to troll a picky eater and failed successfully. 21. On election night in 1948, CBS News was polished, prepped, and about 5 seconds away from announcing Thomas Dewey as the next president. The script was written and the graphics were ready. But just as the anchor took a breath, a twitchy junior producer basically tackled him. hissing that the numbers from the Midwest were doing a moonwalk in Truman's favor. The anchor stalled, stuttered, and waited. Truman ended up shocking the nation, holding up that famous newspaper that got it wrong. Television dodged its first historic faceplant thanks to an intern with gut instincts and zero respect for the teleprompter. 22. In August 2014, while Ferguson, Missouri was erupting, local resident DeRay McKesson stood on a street corner debating whether anyone on the internet actually cared about what he was seeing. He almost kept his phone in his pocket. Instead, he hit send on a few tweets, and suddenly, he wasn't just a guy on a sidewalk, he was the news network. He gained hundreds of thousands of followers overnight, bypassing the van-driving media entirely. That split-second decision to livestream turned hashtags into headlines and forced CNN to chase after smartphones for the real scoop. Traditional media has been trying to catch its breath ever since. 23. In 1987, cartoonist Matt Groening was sitting in a producer's lobby, realizing moments before a pitch meeting that he didn't want to sign away the rights to his Life in Hell comic characters. Panic-stricken, he hastily sketched a dysfunctionally yellow family with overbites right there in the waiting room. He pitched them immediately, and The Simpsons was born. That 5-minute scribble launched an empire, predicted the future, and changed American satire forever. Television history owes everything to a guy who essentially forgot to do his homework. 24. Justice. Anthony Kennedy apparently spent the night before the 2015 Obergefell ruling pacing his chambers like an expectant father, rewriting the majority opinion until the sun came up. He was the swing vote, the wild card. He finally decided to side with the majority, and with the stroke of a pen, same-sex marriage became the law of the land. Wedding planners across the country immediately saw dollar signs flashing in their eyes. Imagine the alternate timeline where he just went to bed early. We'd still be debating civil unions while the cake topper industry struggled to unload their surplus of groom plus groom figurines. 25. 5 minutes before walking onto the stage at the 1940 convention, Franklin D. Roosevelt looked at his speech and thought, "Needs more punch." He scribbled an extra line in the margin. "We must become the arsenal of democracy." That one improvised phrase hit the audience harder than a double espresso, effectively shoving isolationism off the podium and greenlighting the Lend-Lease program. If he had stuck to the original boring draft, the history of World War II might have looked very different, and Europe might have ended up learning English with a very heavy German accent. 26. During the casting for Star Wars, George Lucas hired a carpenter to install a door at the studio, a guy named Harrison Ford. Lucas asked him to stand in and feed lines to the real actors auditioning for Han Solo. After watching Ford casually roast the hopefuls with pure, unbothered arrogance, Lucas realized the carpenter was cooler than any actor in Hollywood. He offered him the part, and the rogue smuggler icon was born. Sometimes the best career move is just showing up to fix a door and accidentally becoming a legend. 27. In 2012, a mid-level official at the CDC stared at a blog post titled "Zombie Apocalypse Preparedness" and almost hit delete. It felt too silly, too informal for an agency that deals with the plague. He decided to hit publish anyway, probably expecting to get fired. Instead, the post broke the internet, crashing the CDC's servers and teaching millions of people about emergency kits using the threat of the undead. It was the first time disaster readiness got a meme makeover. Who knew the best way to get Americans to buy flashlights and canned food was to threaten them with brain-eating monsters? 28. Steve Jobs was halfway through a plate of spicy tuna in 2007 when he looked at the prototype iPhone in his pocket, saw the plastic screen scratched by his keys, and decided he hated it. He called up the CEO of Corning and demanded they manufacture a massive amount of their experimental Gorilla Glass in just 6 weeks. Factories pulled caffeine-fueled all-nighters, the screens toughened up, and your clumsy future self owes him a debt of gratitude for fewer cracked screens. Sometimes revolutionary innovation is just the result of a billionaire having a temper tantrum over his lunch. 29. In March 2003, the vote authorizing the Iraq War was balancing on a razor's edge. Congressman John Murtha, a decorated Marine veteran, was sweating in the cloakroom, torn between his gut instinct and political pressure. At the absolute last second, he switched his vote to aye out of a misguided sense of loyalty to the troops already deploying. The resolution passed, Baghdad fell, and we spent the next 2 decades dealing with the geopolitical whiplash. It's a terrifying reminder that world-altering decisions on Capitol Hill are often made because of high-stakes peer pressure in a hallway. 30. While wrangling the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Representative Howard Smith, a staunch segregationist, thought he was being clever. He mischievously added the word sex to the list of protected classes, assuming that the idea of equal rights for women was so laughable it would tank the entire bill. Instead, the progressives shrugged and said, "Sure, why not?" The bill passed, and women's rights hitchhiked to victory on a joke that landed wrong. Smith's sarcastic stunt accidentally launched a feminist rocket, proving that trolling Congress is a dangerous game that can spectacularly backfire on the troll. 31. President Reagan woke up on August 3, 1981, to the news that 13,000 air traffic controllers were on strike. Most advisors told him to negotiate. Instead, over his morning eggs, he decided to go nuclear. Return to work in 48 hours or you're fired. The union thought he was bluffing. After all, he was an actor. He wasn't bluffing. He fired them all, planes kept flying, and unions reeled for decades. Every CEO with a labor headache took notes that day. It turns out decisions made over breakfast toast rarely echo this loudly across 40 years of workplace negotiations. 32. On December 21, 2015, SpaceX engineers were practically begging for a safe splashdown of their Falcon 9 booster into the ocean. It was the prudent choice. Elon Musk, apparently feeling lucky, tweeted mid-countdown, "Let's land it upright on Cape Canaveral." It was a reckless gamble with millions of dollars of hardware. The booster came down, wobbled like a drunken ballerina, and somehow remained standing. Reusable rocketry jumped from sci-fi movies to the factory floor in an instant, while NASA accountants watched in horror and then slowly started hugging each other. 33. Samuel Morse was ready to test his revolutionary telegraph with a completely random, forgettable sentence. He just wanted to see if the machine worked. But his partner's teenage daughter, perhaps realizing the gravity of the moment better than the inventor, suggested the biblical line, "What hath God wrought?" Morse shrugged, tapped it out, and the phrase echoed, coast to coast. It's a great marketing tip. Always let a teenager pick your launch tagline. Otherwise, the first message sent across the telegraph might have been something like, "Is this thing on?" 34. On June 5, 1944, a torrential storm was battering the English Channel, threatening to derail the D-Day invasion. General Eisenhower sat in a smoke-filled room with a meteorologist who offered a tiny, shaky window of calm weather. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. Ike hesitated, then simply said, "Okay, let's go." That quiet 2-second decision launched the largest armada in history and spelled the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. It remains the most consequential weather forecast since Noah started building an ark. 35. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world was holding its breath, and John F. Kennedy's speechwriters were sweating bullets. The original draft of his address flexed serious invasion muscles, sounding like a declaration of World War III. But just 10 minutes before the broadcast, his brother Bobby Kennedy stepped in as humanity's copy editor. He begged for gentler prose, softening the tone just enough to let Khrushchev save face without looking weak. That rewrite worked, and the planet dodged a glow-in-the-dark makeover. It's a good reminder that sibling feedback is priceless. Your brother's edits might fix your resume, but Bobby's fixed nuclear brinkmanship. 36. Abraham Lincoln spent months waiting for a Union battlefield win to unveil the Emancipation Proclamation, but his generals kept handing him disasters. After the smoky stalemate at Antietam, his cabinet hawks advised him to wait for a real victory. Lincoln, tired of the delays, essentially said, "Close enough," and slapped the document on the table on September 22, 1862. In that moment, the war for the Union officially transformed into a crusade for freedom. Enslaved Americans heard the footsteps of liberation growing louder, all because Lincoln decided that a draw was good enough to change history. 37. In 2019, the legendary Jeopardy host Alex Trebek was battling stage 4 cancer and suffering from excruciating pain. He came very close to stepping back mid-season to rest. Instead, he surprised his producers by walking onto the stage, adjusting his suit and quipping, "I'm still here." Ratings soared, tributes flooded in, and the beloved quizmaster gifted his fans an extra victory lap of nightly brain workouts. It was a powerful demonstration that sometimes courage isn't just a feeling. It's a scheduling decision to show up when everyone expects you to fold. 38. President Eisenhower's farewell address is famous for its warning, but the original draft was actually a puff piece praising the booming defense industry. Minutes before airtime, his conscience apparently yelled, "Plot twist." He grabbed a pen, axed the compliments, and inserted the now famous warning about the military-industrial complex. With that last-minute edit, the old general effectively photobombed his own victory lap with a giant caution sign. He gifted future presidents a handy label for their headaches, and 60 years later, that label still sticks to Washington like duct tape. 39. One winter night, Harriet Tubman was leading a group north when she heard plantation whispers that bounty hunters were lying in wait at the next train station. She had a split second to choose: stick to the plan or improvise. She yanked her terrified passengers off the path and hustled them through a swamp detour lit only by the glitter of the North Star. The ambush failed, the hunters went home empty-handed, and every freedom seeker reached Canada. It cemented Tubman's legend not just as a conductor, but as the Underground Railroad's GPS with attitude, recalculating route to avoid capture. 40. On July 20th, 1974, Elvis Presley was backstage in Vegas, looking less like a king and more like a medical emergency. He was minutes away from canceling the sold-out show due to exhaustion. But at the last second, he popped a cocktail of vitamin injections, and probably some other things, stormed on stage in rhinestones, and delivered one of the wildest, sweatiest performances of his career. Fans fainted, tabloids exploded, and the king cemented his myth with pure, glorious overkill. It's a testament to the power of adrenaline, sequins, and a refusal to let the ticket holders down. 41. The 1960 presidential debate was the night television ate radio stars for dinner. The studio makeup artist offered Richard Nixon some powder to cover his stubble. He declined at the last minute, trying to look tough. Under the hot studio lights, he ended up sweating like a busted sprinkler and looking like a corpse warming up. Kennedy, meanwhile, accepted the touch-up and gleamed like a movie star. Viewers swooned, and televised charisma officially outranked policy experience. Every candidate since has worshipped at the altar of HD-friendly foundation, terrified of pulling a Nixon. 42. Martin Luther King Jr. was halfway through his speech at the Lincoln Memorial, reading from prepared notes that were powerful but academic. Suddenly, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson shouted from behind him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." King looked up, pushed his script aside, and improvised the entire "I Have a Dream" section live on national television. The most famous speech in American history wasn't written in a quiet study. It was a jazz solo riffed in the moment because a friend yelled a request from the back row. 43. Rosa Parks didn't get on that bus planning to start a revolution. She was planning to go home and make dinner. But when the driver snarled at her to move back, saying, "Make it light on yourselves," something snapped. In a split-second decision fueled by a lifetime of indignity, she let stubbornness weld her to the seat. That refusal launched a 381-day boycott, a Supreme Court ruling, and a masterclass in politely savage resistance. It turns out, simple commuter rage can pay huge civil rights dividends if you channel it correctly. 44. In August 1920, the fate of the 19th Amendment, and women's right to vote came down to Tennessee. The legislature was deadlocked in a tie, and the final vote belonged to Harry Byrne, a young representative wearing a red rose, symbolizing his opposition to suffrage. It seemed over. But moments before the roll call, he opened a note from his mother that read, "Hurrah and vote for suffrage. Be a good boy." Terrified of disappointing his mom, Harry shocked the room, voted aye, and changed the Constitution. American democracy owes a massive debt to the sheer, terrifying power of maternal guilt. 45. When Mark Zuckerberg first prepared to launch the newsfeed, early users on campus threatened a riot, calling it a gross invasion of privacy. His lieutenants begged him to roll it back. Instead, he hit launch at dawn anyway, unleashing algorithmic voyeurism on an unsuspecting world. Within hours, the same students who complained were hate-scrolling and secretly loving the status updates. Thus began the modern era of doom-scrolling over breakfast cereal, proving that people claim to love privacy, but they love being nosy significantly more. 46. In 2014, Elon Musk finished a conference call, muttered, "Patents are for the weak," and posted a blog entry that shocked the auto industry. He announced Tesla would open source its electric car patents, effectively inviting competitors to copy his homework. Auto rivals blinked in confusion, battery innovation sprinted forward, and intellectual property lawyers reached for their antacids. It was a massive flex, proving that sometimes the best way to win the race is to give everyone else the map, just so they can see how far ahead you really are. 47. On December 17, 1903, the winds at Kitty Hawk were gusting dangerously, rattling the nerves of the Wright brothers. They could have packed it in and waited for a calmer day. Instead, Orville looked at Wilbur and essentially said, "Let's fly before lunch." 12 bumpy, terrifying seconds later, heavier-than-air flight was a reality. Because they didn't wait for the perfect weather, frequent flyer points became humanity's future addiction. Imagine how different modern life would be if they had decided to grab sandwiches first and lost their nerve. 48. When Marvel Studios pre-screened Iron Man in 2008, the credits originally ended cold, leaving the audience with nothing but darkness. But Robert Downey Jr. and Samuel L. Jackson had ad-libbed a scene just for fun. Producers decided at the last minute to tack it on. Fans lost their minds when Nick Fury mentioned the Avengers Initiative, and the entire cinematic universe concept exploded. Hollywood changed forever, all because two actors refused to stop riffing after the director yelled, "Cut." 49. Thanksgiving 2022 was nearly very boring for tech geeks. OpenAI engineers were debating delaying the public demo of their language model, fearing trolls and safety issues. Sam Altman muttered, "Ship it, we'll learn faster." ChatGPT went live weeks later, and the world lost its collective mind. Suddenly, homework help gained superpowers, and English teachers nationwide started stocking up on plagiarism software like it was pumpkin pie on clearance. That one decision to ship it turned a quiet research project into the fastest-growing app in history. All right, your turn. If you could undo one of these decisions, even if it erased your job, your city, your favorite show, or your stock gains, what number are you killing and why? Drop it in the comments and argue like Congress with less decorum. Hit like, subscribe, and let's see which butterfly you'd happily crush first.